Good afternoon and welcome to the Lunchtime Series with me, Kim Britz, proudly powered by leadershipbydesign.co, leading the charge with insights, information, and ultimately effective results. Joining me in today's leadership and coaching segment, she is a visionary founder behind two exceptional ventures, The Equity Equation, a prestigious consultancy dedicated to fostering inclusive cultures, and the Equity Leadership Institute, an esteemed firm specializing in inclusive leadership training. She's based in the vibrant Washington, D.C., Maryland, if I remember correctly, and she brings over 2 decades of diverse experience spanning the education, nonprofit, and tech sectors to empower her clients. Please welcome Sacha Thomson. Sacha, welcome to the show.
Kevin, thank you so much for having me. Excited to be here.
So to kick it off, just tell us a bit about who you are, where we are, how this business came about, and what we are chatting about today.
Absolutely. So again, my name is Sacha Thomson. I am the inclusive culture curator is what I call myself. And I really help organizations focus on how do we build inclusive cultures that align with our values, our mission, but also ensure that everyone that's a part of our organization feels valued, seen, heard, and connected. I started in this work actually from undergraduate, working in diversity, equity, and inclusion, and working with organizations and with students, trying to think through like, how do we become more inclusive? How do we start to learn about each other in these spaces? And then it just kind of continued throughout my career in program design and development, some leadership development, et cetera. And right now, I think what's so important about this conversation is there is this attack on diversity, equity, and inclusion that's taking place globally right now. But I truly believe that even if those 3 letters go away, the work will still need to be done. And so that's what I'm working with organizations and leaders, talking about how do we make DEI a part of our company DNA? How do we make sure that it is infused in who we are, how we show up, and manifested in our values every single day?
I love it, yeah. And I mean, you also come from nonprofit tech and education sectors, so there's quite a span of background and insights from that. But I mean, one of the things when we initially started, I really, high performing, everybody wants to have a high performing team, but you and I both know because of DEI, these are some aspects that really influence and impact high performing teams. In your experience, what are some of the characteristics that define high performing teams, and how can leaders really cultivate these traits within the organization? What are your insights around that?
Yeah, so, one of the core elements of high performing teams is an environment that is psychologically safe, right? Where everyone feels that they can speak up, they can challenge the status quo, they can push the envelope in ways that are going to be meaningful, right? They're not going to be punished or find retribution in sharing those ideas. And I find that when you have teams that are diverse, that have different backgrounds, different experiences, and people can share their different perspectives in a way that is respectful, but then also kind of pushes, right, the norm, people feel as if, wow, okay, what I'm doing is valued, and they want to share more. They want to contribute more. It's just natural. It's human nature. And so when you're able to push that envelope and say, okay, well, what happens if we were to do this and really explore, right? That's where innovation starts to happen. That's where you start to think beyond where you currently are. And when teams and leaders hone in on and really cultivate those environments where people can be creative, think outside the box, right? That's where you truly start to have some high performing teams, when they're going above and beyond, because it's not just being happy with this is the way we've always done things.
So I mean, psychological safety, and it's a word that everybody knows already. People are aware of this, but I think one of the things that is really that stands out as you speak through it is how do leaders, how do teams know that they are actively creating psychological safety? I know from a human behavior perspective, one of the fundamental needs that we have as humans is significance and recognition.
Yeah.
Right. So if I am not recognized, and a large part of the AI is really wanting us to recognize the differences and associate to those and be curious about them. But I mean, how do we know that we're actually creating psychological safety?
Yeah, I love that question, Kevin, because it's difficult to know, right? And what I have seen and experienced is you have leaders that say, oh, this is a psychologically safe space. They can't determine that for the people on their team, right? And so for the people on their team, they need to know and understand, okay, what will allow Kevin to speak up, right? What environment, what prompts do I need to have so that he's sharing the best of what he has? So it takes some finessing, it takes some understanding of, the characteristics of the individuals that are a part of that team, what causes them to hold back information, what causes them to thrive. And that is often misconstrued with people that are introverts and extroverts, right? So I'm someone that's an introvert where I process a lot of things internally. It's a place that's psychologically safe for me when I know that once I've finished processing, there's the opportunity for me to share. Right. And it's not sharing in a way where it's like, oh, yeah, that's too late. It's like, oh, OK, that's a great idea. Let's think through what that looks like. Right. So regardless of how I share my information or how I process, be it internally or externally, like an extrovert, it is seen as valued. It is now part of the process of what's taking place. And people aren't going to feel shut down, or they're not going to feel that their contributions, regardless of when it's comes up, is not seen as valued. And so you want to create environments where people, regardless of if they're introverts or extroverts, or they may be differently abled, right? They may be neurodiverse in how they share their information, right? That people feel that they can share in a way that is helpful and meaningful to them. And that contribution is valued and considered as part of the overall process. And so again, that takes time, because the leader then needs to understand the individuals that are a part of their team and not just see them as one collective group that does everything the same way.
Yeah, I love that you make the recognition of introvert versus extrovert, and also the thinking process, because a lot of the times people who do take time, and it's just a processing mechanism, right? You might be on that neurodivergent scale and kind of go, some people internalize, they have self-talk happening and they're trying to figure it out. So they may sit there in silence, but with critical questions and prompts that really allow people to kind of share their insights or where they're at, specifically for themselves. I think a really adept leader has the capability of doing that well, and really recognizing the strengths. Because I often find that being a specialist trainer and facilitator for many years now, when when in an environment, if you're not paying attention to the nonverbal communication, you could really get that skewed and quite wrong. But what through the years of doing what I do, you also understand how, introverts could be the thinkers in the room. They could be the ones, like connecting the dots. And I think a lot of the times we kind of see something at face value, and we make an immediate judgment on that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it's fascinating to me, and I think because we are facilitators, you learn to read the room pretty quickly and pretty well. And so I often ask leaders, like, how often do you read the room? How often do you take into consideration who's sitting back because they don't care versus those that are sitting back because they're really processing what is taking place? And like you said, connecting those dots, right? That is a very nuanced way of looking at the environment. That is a skill set and competency that many leaders don't necessarily have, right? It's not something that comes naturally to a lot of people. And so it's something that you need to practice and hone in on over time.
Yeah.
Part of that also ties to emotional intelligence, right? And you being able to understand the emotions of others and how people are reacting to certain things. Because again, if that goes over your head as a leader, I think there's so many missed opportunities in being able to get to being a high performing team.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, how does diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives contribute to performance and cohesion in the team? Do you have any specific examples from your experience that you could share? Maybe, where you really started at a point, and through understanding and unpacking and facilitating this process, you saw some significant changes and cohesion in that environment.
Yeah. So, let's start with, I think oftentimes diversity, equity, and inclusion are kind of lumped together as one thing. And there's three very different things. And so I think we are very good at the diversity piece for the most part, right? We can get the right combination of people and experiences kind of in the room. The inclusion part of that is making sure, okay, everyone's voice is heard, everyone feels that they are a part. And then the equity piece, I think, is the part that we are getting the most pushback on, but it's the one that is least dealt with in the workplace. And I think that's where the beauty of all of this lies. And so the example that comes to mind is, excuse me, working with a leader at a music label last year. And I was brought in because the psychological safety of the team was low and they were trying to figure out what was happening at the team level. And after doing some unpacking and doing some assessments with the team, I realized a couple of things. One, this was the first time that this leader actually led a team of more than 2 people. And so it was this approach of, I'm going to treat everyone equally so that it's fair. But it wasn't fair because not everyone had the same needs. Not everyone was in the same place in their careers. Not everyone had the same role. So even though he was trying to do that from a good place, it really needed to be a more equitable process by giving people what they needed in order to be successful. And so as I was coaching him, one of the questions that I asked him was, have you asked the people on their team what they need from you in order to be successful? And you would have thought that I had given him $1 million because, he was just like, I'd never thought about asking that question. And in him asking that question, he found that, again, everyone had different needs. Everyone wanted different experiences, right? So he was assuming, oh, everyone wants to take the same career path that I took. That wasn't necessarily the case. And so being able to step back, being able to think about the unique experiences that people had, the different levels of people on their team, right? So that's the diversity piece, making sure that everyone's voice was heard. And so again, him not dominating all of their meetings, right? How do you start to get other voices involved, get other people to lead some of those meetings, right? And coach them on, okay, you can, next time, let's think about doing it from this perspective, right? So he switched from being a manager to a people leader and really honing in on what it means to lead people. And so that equity piece was really giving people what they needed. There were some folks on his team didn't need anything from him at all other than make sure that my paycheck, came through every 2 weeks. Others wanted a bit more hand-holding. And so the question was, is there an opportunity for some of your more seasoned team members to mentor some of the others on the team so you're not having to step into that role, right? And so how can you coach them on being a mentor? It totally shifted the dynamic of the team. And so when I think about diversity, equity, and inclusion in that way, it is, how do you truly leverage the unique experiences of everyone, understanding even some historical context of what's happening, and create opportunities where everyone gets what they need in order to be successful.
Yeah, and that ties right back into high performing teams, right? Just the question, ask what you need from your team to be a successful leader. I think that frame, And I always go, come from a position of you don't know what you don't know until you know, right?
Right,
And
exactly.
you get so caught up in the busyness. But I also, I think what stands out as you speak through that example for us, is asking key critical questions, right?
Yeah.
And I think, one of the presuppositions that we have in neurolinguistics is, the meaning of your communication is the response that you get, right? And when suddenly you realize that you're not getting the response, you kind of have to think back and go, okay, what is the meaning of my communication? And that ties beautifully exactly to your point, right? Because and just another, variant of what you were saying is that emotional intelligence, as you mentioned earlier, right?
Yeah.
Very often, I think people see this as going, oh, you need empathy. Yeah, we know about that, right? But essentially, we know humans are driven by emotion very often, right? And usually triggered by emotion. And sometimes your ego gets in the way of asking a good critical question in any case. So, to really edge towards that high-performing team, good questions, emotionally intelligent leader. But I think that, becoming a people leader versus a manager, that is a huge differentiator when you see it in that context, right?
Yeah, it's funny. I was working with someone as someone was coaching me several years ago when I was in corporate, and the aha moment I had was when she said, "We manage projects, we lead people." And so when you think about it in that perspective, it's like, oh, okay, so yeah, we do have projects that we're working on, but I have people that need to get those projects done. How do I lead those people in a way where the projects are going to get done regardless? And it was a mindset shift that I had in, oh, okay, we're not widgets, right? We're not cogs in a wheel that we just need to get this thing done. It's how can I, as a leader, give you what you need in order for you to be successful so that this gets done, right? That's the least of my concerns. I'm more concerned about your development and your growth as a professional. And from that mindset shift, that's how I've approached even my coaching and my work with leaders.
Absolutely. I love that. So what are some of the common challenges? I know that you mentioned equity is one of the pushbacks that we do get, but what are you seeing in organizations that organizations are actually facing with integrating practical, useful DEI principles into their high-performing teams? What are some of those challenges that leaders should be aware of?
You know what, Kevin, I love this question because it's going to be one that you probably are not thinking about.
Yeah.
The biggest issue I am seeing right now that ties in diversity is generational diversity in the workplace.
Yes. Yeah.
And communicating across generations, right? Leading across generations. And especially in this post-pandemic kind of world that we're in, things have become so much more pronounced that the expectations of certain generations are just very highlighted. And so I'm being asked to come in and talk to organizations about right now there's 4 kind of in the workplace, in the corporate workplace, but there are 5 generations that are around us. And we need to prepare for that 5th one coming into the workplace, because if you think Gen Z is, pushing back a lot of things, Gen Alpha is continuing that. And so it's not going to change. And so how do organizations manage across all of these generations while understanding that this new normal is very different than when baby boomers or when even Gen X, came into the workplace, some of those expectations. And so how do you start to shift how you operate right now? How do you start to manage expectations? Because you now have some younger generations that feel just because they're in a role for 2 years, they should immediately get promoted, right? This is also a generation that has very high expectations when it comes to diversity, equity, and inclusion in the workplace. And they're looking for benefits that support diversity, equity, and inclusion. Other generations didn't think about that from, first of all, they were just thinking about diversity and inclusion, not necessarily equity. And then now tie benefits into that. Like, what does that even look like? And so I think that's probably one of the biggest challenges that I'm seeing right now in that corporate workspace, is how to balance all of those expectations while understanding in the next 10 years, the corporate space is going to shift, right? The nonprofit space is going to shift. And how do you prepare for that now? Because if you wait for another 10 years, that next generation is going to be preparing to come in.
I'm so glad that that's one of the key points that you mentioned, because in the corporates that I deal with, it's a generation communication kind of issue that happens. And what's beautiful, and this is what I started noticing about Gen Z, is there's an expectation that they're placing on their leadership, right? Where, when 20 years ago, you and I were kind of doing our thing, when a leader spoke, you kind of like, that was law, right? And it's literally flipped around, kind of going, no, I expect you to be a leader. And if you're saying you're the leader, I'm expecting you to be responsible to things. And I think, one of the interesting facets around that is, especially older people, are making a generalization, but older people get into that rut of going, well, this is how we've always done things, right? And you kind of go, yeah, but, we're at the point in life where leadership, we have to have responsible leaders. And that means, that even takes into account, how do you communicate and how are you responsible for the things that come out of your mouth? And if you're not, well, then you should check yourself and redo it or rethink something, because it's not working, right? So I love the fact that Gen Zers and Gen Alpha are really pushing that agenda, because it turns back to climate change. How do we stick to our values? And do you even recognize the values that you're putting and plastering all of your walls? Like, do you live by those values, right? And we need leaders to step up, and we need them to be responsible for what they say, right?
Yeah, it's a level of accountability we haven't seen in this space, and I appreciate it. I love it. It's funny because you just said, right, this is the way we've always done things. But when you think about psychological safety, that's the total opposite of psychological safety. And so it ties back into, how do you create these environments where these voices, this younger generation that by the numbers are starting to outpace the number of baby boomers that are in the workplace, the number of Gen X that are in the workplace, right? So by sheer volume, the culture is going to have to shift. And so the way we've always done things is not going to stand up anymore. And it's the, well, you have to kind of pay your dues. You have to go through this experience. This is a generation that they don't care about that, right? I want to do it. I'll create it myself. They have picked up from Gen X that whole entrepreneurial mindset. I'll create it myself. I will do it in a way that is more globally friendly, more environmentally friendly. Everything that you're saying, they are going to create and build that. And so that is going to be the competition.
Yeah. And I love that you point that out, because essentially that's what the future needs. We need evolved thinkers. We need better solutions to, the future, because I always make the comment that, in the last 100 years, some of the worst known men in the world have made decisions that has led countries into absolute dire straits, right? So we absolutely need to rethink our approach to leadership and who we're putting into a leadership position, right? So, yeah, I love that. But one of the questions that I do have is, what roles do leaders, and we've already mentioned a few, but what roles do leaders play in fostering an inclusive culture that drives team performance, but essentially from a best practice perspective or behavioral perspective that you can share with our audience today?
Yeah, I think the main one is modeling the behavior, right? It's one thing. And again, that goes back to the accountability and the expectations. It's your words and your actions have to align. And so for leaders, what does that really look like? What does that mean? What kind of leader do you want to be? And your actions and words have to be in alignment, because what is happening right now, not just even with the younger generations in the workplace, but the expectations just across the board is that what you say is what you do. And you have to go beyond, don't do, do what I say, not what I do. And your actions totally are misaligned. That was yesteryear. We are now in a place where those actions and words have to align. And so being someone that is an inclusive leader, someone that wants to get the best out of their teams, has to have high emotional intelligence, has to understand what psychological safety looks like across the organization, has to be vulnerable, right? You are not, you don't always have to be on the pedestal, right? There's this need for the humanity of who we are, and understanding that we make mistakes. We are all human. And so owning up to those mistakes, or owning up to, hey, I got to this position, but it wasn't an easy process. These are some of the stumbling blocks that I had. And so using that humility in a way that we've never really seen historically before, because there's this whole, rugged individualism and, pulled myself up from the bootstraps and, all of this mentality. And I think a lot of that is starting to peel away, because people want to see that you are human. And so that, I think, is going to be one of the key factors in leaders being successful and leaders being able to prove to their teams, we're in this together. And so in order for us to be high performing, I need to be high performing as well, but I need to do it in a human way.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, modeling behavior and, saying what you're going to do and do what you say, high EQ, vulnerability, and humility. I think what stands out about those, best practices is vulnerability. And I still find very often that ego gets into, in the way of that vulnerability. And, it's that old saying, I don't know who said it, but I'm like, if you're the most intelligent person in the room, you might be in the wrong room, right?
Right.
And it's, if you're actively asking critical questions and really tapping in with, into the curiosity of who are these people, and, how do I get to be a people person or a people leader, rather than just manage the hell out of you kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Who you then? Who do you then become, right? Mm-hmm. And I absolutely love these points. Modeling behavior, I mean, that's a no-brainer for me as well. But Sacha, if we have to wrap up today's conversation, because I can see we get carried away here. Having so much fun. What do you want the audience to, like, 3 top things that you'd like the audience to leave with, that, they can maybe take away right now today, and kind of have that sort of overview and what's the word I'm looking for foresight to really impact the environment? What would you say to them?
Yeah, so the first one is to do some introspective work and figure out, what kind of leader do you want to be? Right. I think so many leaders just jump into the role without being introspective and understanding kind of their strengths and weaknesses and who they want to be, versus just kind of emulating the leaders that they've had before, who may have been flawed or not. So one is just really taking that time to be introspective and understand the leader that you want to be. 2 is lean in. I love how you said it, lean into the curiosity. Right. Maslow's Center of Excellence, Center of Leadership, did some research back in 2021, I believe it was, where they said 2 of the characteristics that employees are looking for out of their leaders is leader as coach and leader as mentor. We are really great at being mentors. We are horrible at being coaches. And so that is asking those curious questions and leaning into that curiosity. And so that's the second thing, is asking yourself, pausing and asking questions of certain situations, rather than always having the answer. And then the third thing actually ties back to that, is you don't always have to have the answer, right? And being comfortable in that discomfort and understanding the humility and vulnerability that comes along with not knowing the answer. But that does tie back to, if you don't know the answer to something, let someone know, I don't know the answer, but let me get back to you, right? So now you're kind of circling back, you're creating that relationship, you're building in some of that psychological safety and trust that has been so hard to hold on to for these last couple of years. So those are the three things that I would recommend for folks.
I absolutely love it. Thank you. Guys, she's, I just want to make sure I get this right. She's a psychologically safety in the workplace, and that's what she works in, inclusive leadership, facilitator and speaker, and an ICF certified coach. That's Sacha Thomson. Sacha, thank you so much for the time. Thank you for being on the show and sharing some insights. I find that very valuable, and I hope to chat to you soon.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, Kevin.
Cheers for now.